I felt like I had no other option but to answer them. I felt like a dog with my tail in between my legs, like, yeah, okay, I'll give you all the details, but I felt super uncomfortable. But my aunt and uncle were like, well, this is what we have to do because you were an unbaptized publisher. We have to get to the bottom of everything that you experienced. And I didn't feel super protected in that setting. I felt like I had to fend for myself and I was dealing with judgment.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramacro. As you all know, I like to interview fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and today I am joined by just such a person. Welcome, Porsche Alexis.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute thrill to have you on the channel, Porsche. Suffice to say, you have an interesting story to tell regarding extricating yourself from a very toxic set of beliefs. I'm interested to know how you wound up involved with Jehovah's Witnesses to begin with.
So my mom, she was the driving force behind the belief system that I was brought up with as a Jehovah's Witness. She was introduced to it through her parents, but my understanding is that she didn't take it seriously until her mid to late 20s. She ended up marrying a boy out of high school and getting pregnant as a teenager, so I doubt she was really involved with the Jehovah's Witnesses being able to do that. But then she went through a divorce with her first husband. And once she met my dad through the career choice that she had, which was through life insurance, she, at some point after she married my dad, she reintroduced herself to the faith. And she dove right in and hasn't looked back. So I was born into it pretty much from the time I was conceived until I was 18. I was part of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Wow. I'm not going to ask how you knew from the time you were conceived, but
it's just intuition.
Okay, so intuition. Okay. So yeah, you were born into it. At what age were you baptized?
I actually never got baptized. Excuse me. My brother and sister, I have an older brother and an older sister, and they are 6 and 10 years older than me. And they got baptized, and I watched my sister get disfellowshipped. And sorry, I watched my brother remove himself, and he would be disfellowshipped if he came back. And I knew I was going to mess it up if I got baptized. So I never did that. I was like, no chance. I know that I'm going to eventually leave. And I didn't want to deal with what I watched my sister go through. So I never did.
And was that, I mean, that makes sense, I guess, if you're watching your siblings, struggle to stay faithful or to stick it out. That's a powerful reason in and of itself. But were there any clues in your childhood or in your teen years that kind of concerned you regarding the group and what its beliefs would mean to you in your life?
So basically, growing up, I had a different relationship with the Jehovah's Witness religion than I think a lot of people do, because my dad is actually atheist. So I had two very polarizing belief systems in a way that I was introduced to growing up. But my mom was the strict one and the one who said, this is how you have to be brought up. And so I constantly watched my dad going and living his life and wishing I could be more like him and have this perceived freedom. But I was stuck inside the confines of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And because of the fact that my dad is an atheist, we were automatically casted out as a family by other witnesses. We were looked at as bad association for having a non-believing father/husband for my mom. And we weren't invited to any family gatherings. You know how you'd have get-togethers, there'd be barbecues and things like that to make up for the lack of holiday presents. We weren't invited hardly ever because of my dad. And in fact, I had a lot of my childhood friends not being able to come over to my house because they were worried that my dad was going to like persuade them away from the faith, which I always thought was fascinating, because if he was going to do that with anyone, I think it would be me and not some random child. So I watched a lot of the judgment, the black and white thinking, the you're either all good or you're all bad. And that has always made me feel uncomfortable. And I never felt good within the faith. I always felt like something was off. And I genuinely could not wait. I was counting down the years until I turned 18 and I could leave on my own accord. But it was very complicated and messy. And I really didn't like the judgment that was constantly around you, the tattletaling on your peers, the judgment of how you were dressed one day or how often you participated. I think that conditioning really offset me and made me feel uncomfortable from the beginning.
I'm just struggling to get my head around. I mean, he's not really here to speak for himself, is he? But
No.
I'm struggling to understand your dad's perspective as an atheist, because, obviously there are, a wide spectrum of families when it comes to religion and beliefs, and there will always be, parents where perhaps the mother is of one faith, and the father is of another faith or no faith in this case. And somehow or other it kind of works out. And I just struggle to relate to a father who is atheist, essentially saying, okay, indoctrinate my kids,
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if he's atheist in terms of just not being religious and not being bothered to look into religion, that's one thing. But if he's aware of the arguments against religion and the arguments against belief in God, again, I'd struggle to relate to just kind of standing back and saying, yeah, fill their heads with all of this kind of nonsense, which I know to be not true. Are you able to give any insight as to what might have been going through his mind?
Yeah, I've actually had several conversations with my dad over my lifetime about it. And my dad, he actually had an introduction to the religion through his grandparents. And something to know about my parents is they're 20 years apart in age. My dad is older by 20 years. So his grandparents were first generation Jehovah's Witnesses for themselves. And so he kind of knew about it, but he never was religious. He didn't care about it. In fact, he had a pretty rough childhood and he left home at 15 and started a whole new path for himself. So he wasn't indoctrinated by it, but he understood it to a degree. And so when my mom decided to revisit her faith and go back to being a Jehovah's Witness, my dad's entire MO was basically, I don't care what you believe in, so long as you, which is going to be ironic here in a second, so long as you don't harm other people, or you don't harm yourself. I don't care what you believe in as long as it makes you happy. And my dad, he wasn't around a lot because he traveled for work all the time. He was a high up person in a life insurance company, so he traveled about 40 weeks out of the year. And when he was home, it was, I don't want to call him a Disneyland because he's more Disneyland dad, because he's more than that to me, but kind of, he was home and everything felt lighter and more fun. But when he would leave, it was very strict and structured. And so he gave my mom all the reins to raise us into the faith, and she did. And he gave up holidays. He also kind of, out of respect, adopted specific habits. Like in the United States, for the 4th of July in our neighborhood, they would put little tiny American flags in the front yard for everyone in the neighborhood. And my dad would discreetly remove it and throw it away in the trash out of respect for my mom. And so he was very much, do whatever you want to do, raise them however you want to raise them. And I don't think he really saw the harm that it was really doing to me or my siblings. I can't speak too much on their stories, but I don't think he really saw that or understood the pain that we were experiencing behind the scenes. All he knew is what bad could come from teaching the kids about the 10 Commandments and being a good person and having a good moral compass. And he was very hands-off in that regard. And I'm not going to lie, as an adult, I've been through a crap ton of therapy, getting through my religious trauma and my childhood trauma. And there's a part of me that, as sad as it is to say this, because my dad is very near and dear to my heart, there's a part of me that does resent him for allowing this to happen for years. And it just irks me to my core. Like, how could you not allow me more freedom? And my dad, to his credit, when I was growing up, he would say, your mom's out of town for the weekend, go to the movies with your friends from school. He would like give me a little taste of freedom, but it almost confused me more because I would have that taste of freedom and then it would be ripped from me the moment that she came home. And so it was always confusing. But my parents' relationship, I've never seen them argue over religion. I've never seen them have any sort of tension. My dad is very tolerant, like one of the most tolerant people that I know. And he has always said to her, as long as you don't convert me, I'm very much in my ways. I don't care what you do. And she never has tried to convert him. So.
It sounds like he was more of a can't be bothered atheist than a this is nonsense atheist, you know? So that does make a little bit more sense, but I can certainly relate to your frustration. And, you know, I can imagine it's quite challenging to navigate those conversations with your dad. You mentioned that getting out, you know, even though you weren't baptized, getting out was complicated. So in what way was it complicated?
Perhaps I'll set the stage for this because my story is very layered. So all of my friends, everyone that I ever knew, obviously they were in the faith, and I didn't have a support system outside of the faith. And I think a lot of people who leave the organization, there's that fear that you're going to lose everyone. And I still had that fear, even though I wasn't baptized and I wasn't going to get disfellowshipped. I still knew that the people I grew up with wouldn't acknowledge my existence. I knew that I would lose my friends and my support system. So, of course, I was fearful of that next step. Even though I anticipated tasting a bit of freedom, I still had a natural amount of fear that I had to really wrap my mind around in order to make the decision that I did. It's not a light decision for anyone, baptized or not, to leave an organization you were brought up in. And growing up, I had someone very near and dear to my heart. Her name was Virginia, and she was my Nana and my grandmother that I wasn't actually related to. She adopted me from the congregation when I was a baby. She just loved me and immediately brought me into her life. And she was my favorite person. She was more of a mom to me than my actual mom is. And she passed away from cancer when I was 12. I actually watched her die. I watched her take her last breath. And it really traumatized me to the core. And I became extremely angry at God and at life. I just didn't understand how such a beautiful person could be taken away in such a painful manner. And when she died, I attended her funeral at the Kingdom Hall. I don't know if they're actually called funerals. It's been too long for me to remember.
They still call them funerals. Yeah.
Okay. And I attended that, and it was such a strange experience because I remember being so devastated over her loss, and so many people coming up to me saying, if you stick with Jehovah, then you'll see her in paradise. And it was immediately that jump to guilt tripping and brainwashing into believing that I could never leave because I would never see her again. And because she was so important to me, that's all I wanted. And so even at 12 years old, I knew I didn't really want to be a part of the organization, I all of the adults in my life were saying this to me, and I trust the adults, right? Like, I think they know best. And it was very, very painful and confusing. So when I left, I also had to wrap my mind around the fact that I may never see her again, because I wanted to believe in a paradise. I wanted to believe that I could hold my loved one again. And I carried that guilt everywhere, because I would have people coming up to me throughout my teen years going, every time I see you, you remind me of Virginia. Keep going, keep going. And no one took the time to comfort me through my grief. It automatically was just jumping into, you better not leave or else, you know? So that was always swimming in the back of my mind. And that definitely added another layer of complication to my decision.
Okay, so you were essentially from the age of 12 being guilt tripped into remaining in the religion, with this kind of carrot being dangled of, you know, you're only going to see Virginia again if you commit to the religion.
Yes.
How else were things complicated in terms of your kind of inner turmoil?
Sure. So, so like I said, so my story has so many layers. I feel like an ogre from Shrek. He's like, you know, ogres are
Let's
like
peel
onions.
back those layers. Let's get that onion chopped. It's going to make us all cry, but it'll result in a tasty treat at the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I had so much guilt and so much fear, and all I wanted to do was feel like I belonged somewhere. But it was so hard because I never feel like I truly belonged in the faith, but I wasn't sure I was going to make it outside of the faith either. And going back in time a bit, so in elementary school, I actually started to show signs of mental illness. And very early on, super young, my therapist, when I told her everything, she said, that's way too young to be displaying these signs. But when I was in second or third grade, I developed trichotillomania, which means that I was pulling out my own hair. And I also developed signs of obsessive compulsive disorder. And all of this was a result of the stress of being brought up in the organization and feeling like I was under a microscope at every single moment. And I felt like I wasn't good enough. I was so afraid that God was going to smite me for my own thoughts or for eating a cupcake during school. And I had so much fear living in this tiny little body of mine. And I started to also experience major panic attacks in elementary school. And I don't know how much we're allowed to divulge into on YouTube or what you're comfortable with, but I will also give a trigger warning that I dealt with CSA. And,
right. Okay.
So if you edit this however you wish, but I'll go ahead and tell my story. But
no, but only to the extent that you feel comfortable, because, you know, this is the sort of thing where I've interviewed enough survivors to understand. I mean, I can never understand what it is to be a survivor, but I at least understand that simply talking about it can be traumatizing. So, you know, you are fully in control here. You share as much or as little as you want to share.
okay, thank you. So I had a next door neighbor, and he was a friend of mine. I'd see him all the time. We'd play hide and go seek in our neighborhood. It was the only worldly friend that I had, just because we lived right next door. And when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I went over to his house to see if he could play, and he wasn't home, but his 2 older brothers were. And they invited me to come in and play with them, and I didn't feel any fear. I've known them my whole life. So I went in, and they took advantage of me. Both of them did, when I was 6 or 7. And I remember thinking something horrible had happened to me, but I wasn't sure how to verbalize it. I remember it was my first experience with having a dissociative episode where I felt out of my own body. And I went to my house and I locked myself in my room and I just felt completely numb. And I was so afraid to tell my parents because I was alone with a boy. I remember thinking I'm going to get in trouble for being alone with a boy. And so I never said anything until I was about 16 years old, many years after the fact. And that situation that unfolded, it led to a deepening of my mental health decline. And I bottled up so much. And when I was in middle school, I started to experience further dissociative episodes. I remember being in my English class, and the class was just about to start. I was sitting next to this girl and she was talking to me, and I remember responding, but I don't know what I was saying. And it was so weird. If you've ever had a dissociative episode, you basically time skip into a different place. So she was talking to me and I completely blacked out of what I was saying. And the next thing I knew, I was in the hallway being scolded by my teacher. And I lost a huge chunk of time between what happened in the class and how I ended up there. And I was so confused because she was yelling at me. She said, "You're being so disrespectful by not stopping your conversation at the time class is starting." And I just looked at her like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she thought that I was on drugs and asked me if I was smoking weed or something. And I said, "No, I blacked out. I really don't know what you're saying." And I remember thinking I was crazy. What just happened to me? I have no idea what just happened. And then my Nana died very shortly after that experience, and my mental health got even worse. I started to have more dissociative episodes. I started to have, trigger warning, suicidal ideations and thoughts. And yet I felt like I couldn't turn to anyone about them because mental health was not a priority in the organization. I remember therapy being discouraged when I was growing up. And so I bottled up all of that darkness. I just ate it on my own. And I ended up, once my Nana died, I ended up becoming angry, and I got into fights in school, and I got into trouble all the time. I got into fights with my mom. I don't want to make this about her, but she is a narcissist. So I grew up with a narcissistic parent on top of everything else. So I felt like I had no safe place to talk about what I was experiencing. And by the time that I was able to leave, I already had confusion about who I was and what I wanted to do with my life and where I was going to go. And by the time I was 18, fun fact, my mom actually kicked me out of the house twice between 13 and 15. So,
sorry, did you say between 13 and 15?
Yes.
Well, where were you supposed to go at that age?
My mom bought me a one-way ticket to go live with an aunt who I had never really known in a different state. And she was even more hardcore of a Jehovah's Witness than my mom was. My uncle was an elder at the time. And so I got shipped off to this tiny little mountain town where I knew nobody. And they were so strict, Lloyd, that they didn't even own a television because they called it the devil's eyeball. They were so afraid of having television in the home. And I
did not watch the right television, it sounds like. I don't know what shows they've been watching, but yeah, go on.
I don't know either, but they were very scared of it and very serious about it. And they would monitor all of the music that I listened to. And I was a little rebellious. I loved Metallica. I wasn't supposed to because it's metal. It's, demonic.
T-Ball will be pleased to hear that. He loves all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I loved the Black Album. It was my favorite. And I snuck it onto the plane with me to Arizona, and they found it and they broke it. And I was devastated because I was such a fan of Metallica. And I was like, why? I love them so much. But they monitored everything that I did. And sorry, my story's a little all over the place because I have.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm following it so far. And if I can't follow it anymore, I'll let you know. Yeah.
Okay, good, because I have ADHD. So I'm like, wait, is this
Mm.
in order of sequence?
We're
So
kind of going backwards and forwards a little bit, but I've kind of gathered that you basically, when you were in school, you were having mental health problems due to your background,
yes.
and now you're feeling us in a little bit more as to what led to those mental health kind of dissociative episodes. One of which being the fact that you had a narcissistic mother who, rather than actually doing her job of parenting you, decided to ship you off to ultra fundamentalist Jehovah's Witness relatives. Is that fair?
Yeah, she didn't want to put up with me anymore, so she put me on a plane and said, "Someone else will take care of you. They'll straighten you up," basically. So when I got kicked out and I was sent there, I had a secret boyfriend that was part of the congregation that I was a part of back at home with my parents. And we were together for 2 years in private. And that was actually a big catalyst of why I got kicked out, because they knew that we were together. So they shipped him 2,000 miles to the East Coast to be with his dad, and then sent me to my aunt so we could be far apart and have no contact with each other. And
more thousands of miles, the better, seemed to be the logic in that. Okay.
Absolutely. And I was really heartbroken because that was my one person back at home that I had. When my Nana died, I was looking for love. I was looking for connection. And that was the first person that I had that gave it to me. And he was ripped away from me. And so I struggled a lot with depression and feeling very isolated. And all I wanted to do when I got to Arizona was attend their school there. I wanted to go back to public school because I wanted as much normalcy as I could possibly have. I wanted to be around peers my age. And my aunt told me that if I read all of the Watchtower and Awake magazines, it was equivalent to a college education, and to not worry about attending school.
That's actually something that Charles Taze Russell once said. I think he said that about the studies in the scriptures. So yeah, sorry, go on.
That's probably where they got it from.
Yeah.
So I was not allowed to go back to school. I had to figure everything out through the Jehovah's Witness indoctrination. And because I had a boyfriend, on the first day of me being in that state with my aunt and uncle, I had to sit in a room with 3 elders, and I had to tell them whether or not I had experienced anything sexual. And I was humiliated because I was an unbaptized publisher at this point. I was so humiliated and so scared to be sitting around with a bunch of middle-aged men describing this, because the answer was, yeah, my first boyfriend and we had heavy petting, as they called it in the organization. And so I had to detail everything that I went through. And they stripped me away from my unbaptized publisher privileges. And yet they still had me put in pioneer hours. I went door to door with them. I couldn't talk at the doors, but I had to go door to door with them for 70 hours a month.
If you were no longer an unbaptized publisher, and no longer qualified to represent the congregation in the preaching work, which is what an unbaptized publisher is basically supposed to do, how did they have? What was a How on earth could they drag you out in the preaching work if you were no longer qualified to do it?
Honestly, I don't know. Neither of my aunt or uncle had a job. Their entire thing was within the organization, and they didn't want to leave me home alone. So they dragged me along for every single service day that they had, which was a lot because they were both pioneers. So I don't know how that worked. I don't know the details. Maybe my uncle had more pull because he was an elder and he could explain the situation to people, but I have no idea. All I know is that was my entire life for several years, for about 2 to 3 years. That was my entire life.
And what ages would this have been? Sorry.
That's okay. 13 to 16.
Right. So you to be clear, you were subjected to invasive questions of a sexual nature
Yes.
when you were between the ages of 13 and 16?
Yes. I was 13 when I was introduced to the invasive questions about sexual things.
Okay. I think that's really important for viewers to know, because obviously not everyone who watches this channel understands what Jehovah's Witnesses are all about. Many viewers, there'll be nothing shocking about this, because they'll know about it from their own experience. But this is an organization where elders feel empowered to do this sort of thing, and goodness knows in many cases will be getting off on it. So
and
thank you for sharing
that. Scared
that.
me, of course. Yeah, that worried me, because I had dealt with CSA from my neighbor that I didn't tell anyone, and here I was sitting in a room full of men talking about this, and it was really triggering for me. And I remember them asking me, what did he do to you? And what did you do to him? And how long did this last? Like, these really invasive questions. And I felt like I had no other option but to answer them. I felt like a dog with my tail in between my legs. Like, yeah, okay, I'll give you all the details. But I felt super uncomfortable. But my aunt and uncle were like, well, this is what we have to do, because you were an unbaptized publisher. We have to get to the bottom of everything that you experienced. And I didn't feel super protected in that setting. I felt like I had to fend for myself, and I was dealing with judgment. And by the time that I came back home to live with my mom, so I was 16. So I was there in Arizona for about 3 years. And then I came back when I was 16 to live with my mom. When I came back, every single person I had as a friend that was around my age, they spread rumors about me that I was a harlot, that I was a slut, because I had one boyfriend, and we didn't even go all the way, to be honest. We didn't. But they started all of these rumors. And this was, of course, at a time before social media was really a thing. MySpace was loosely around, but most Jehovah's Witness kids didn't have MySpace. So a group text went around to everyone, even people I didn't know, that was a joke about me. And it was, what did Porsche, aka Slut's right leg, say to the left? Nothing, because there's always something in between. And they sent that.
Jehovah's Witnesses were doing this?
Yes.
Oh, isn't that Christian of them?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. And it was funny, because my mom was telling me to be more like those kids, that I should aim for the same goals that they had, that I should act similar to them, and to try to be friends with these people. So I tried, and they started all of this rumor nonsense about me. And when I found out about it, I was so devastated that I contemplated taking my own life. And I couldn't tell anyone. I was so ashamed and sad and depressed. I didn't know how to have a voice in the situation. So finally, I told my mom about the text that was going around, and she found out who it was, and she had them come to my house and face me directly. And it was a brand new friend that I was trying to make in the congregation. And I felt so slighted by this. And it was a boy who knew my previous boyfriend. And he had apologized to me, but the rumors kept going. And it got so bad that when I went to the conventions, it's thousands of people at these conventions. And there's a lot of melting pot of congregations, people I don't know, people I'm seeing for the first time. And I remember thinking, screw them, I'm going to go make new friends. And I walked up to a group I had never seen before in my life. And I said, hi, I'm Porsche. And they were like, oh, you're that slut. And they wouldn't talk to me at the convention. I'd never seen them before. I didn't even know their names.
The love that never fails.
Yeah.
Apparently, yeah.
I felt very outcasted. I thought I was coming home to more friends, more opportunities. And I came back to my definition of what hell would be if hell existed. And I could not escape it. And then I finally became friends with someone. It was another boy, and he was like, don't worry about them. And he was so nice to me. And at this point, I was 17 and I was madly in love with him. He was a pioneer. He was like the picture perfect Jehovah's Witness boy. And I thought my mom will love him, right? Like he's perfect. And we ended up having sex. I lost my virginity to him. And because he was a pioneer, obviously that caused a problem. So he had to go and confess to the elders what he had done. And it blew up between my family and his family. It became a really big issue. And the elders sat down with him and asked him about what we had done together. Again, that's that very sexually invasive questioning. But the difference between what they said to him and what they would have said to me is they said, how do you know she was a virgin? How do you know? And painted it as I was, because the rumors were going around, they painted it as I was someone who seduced him against his will somehow, and that I was this.
Was his dad an elder by any chance?
What?
Was his dad an elder by any chance?
I don't remember. He could have been, actually. I don't remember, but it's possible. But because they were in a different congregation than what I was a part of, so I'm not sure if his dad was or wasn't. But they said, well, so sorry, my voice keeps going out on me. So they just said, give us details of how you know she was a virgin. And he's like, well, it's pretty obvious when a girl loses her virginity. And he told me about this questioning afterwards. After he got disfellowshipped, he came to me and he told me about everything. And he got mad at me for him getting disfellowshipped. And he said, I was only your friend to see if you were a slut anyway. That's the only reason I was your friend, was just to see if I could sleep with you, essentially. And I thought, really? You of all people, the picture perfect Jehovah's Witness boy, like you of all people, you were only my friend to see if I was a slut. That was great. So I was devastated by this. And he quit talking to me altogether. He's like, I can't talk to you anymore. And he would act like I didn't exist once he was disfellowshipped. He blamed me for his disfellowshipping. And once all of that came out, then the rumor mill picked up once again. It became a huge talk of the town, and nobody would look at me. Nobody would acknowledge me. It was so interesting because
even though you weren't actually baptized.
Exactly. I was about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're still being shunned.
Yes.
I mean, even before you'd lost your virginity, you were being treated as a slut.
Yes.
So goodness only knows how they were treating you after you had lost your virginity.
It was bad.
Yeah.
So I felt even more suicidal. I couldn't escape this. And I was still, even at 17, I'm getting older and closer to 18. I was still in that bubble. I couldn't leave it. So I had to face all these people and face their spiritual bypassing and their judgments and the shunning. And it felt so weird because I was thinking, I'm not even baptized and you guys are treating me like I have been. And it was so disruptive to my mental health. I just started to decline even more. But my mom kept saying, well, if you hadn't given them a reason, Porsche, they wouldn't be saying these things. And instead of comforting me, she blamed me. And I really wanted my mom's approval so badly. If anyone grows up with a narcissistic parent, you can do no right. You try and you can't do anything right. And I so badly wanted that approval from my mom that I was willing to continue to try to be a Jehovah's Witness. And that was also the added layer of why it was hard for me to leave, because I just wanted her love. I wanted her approval. but I also wanted to prove people wrong. I felt like I had to defend myself or have a point to prove. And I thought, I'll show them, like I can show them that I'm better than they are, and I can be a better witness than a lot of these people were. And so when it came time to leave, I had this internal conflict of the world that I wanted to go out and explore versus the approval that I really wanted from my peers and from my mom, and to just prove people wrong. And I didn't know how to melt those two worlds together because they're very separate. Obviously, the only answer would be live a double life, but I didn't want to do that. So when I left on really damaged terms. I was very broken as a person. I was extremely broken. I don't think they could have broken me down any more than they actually did, to be honest with you.
But when you say you left,
Mm-hmm.
what does leaving look like when you're not even when you're not baptized? So presumably you mean you just stopped attending meetings.
I moved out of my parents' house. I moved in with a complete stranger. Safe. Love that for me. But I moved in with a complete stranger, and I cut off all contact, willingly and unwillingly, from everyone. Leaving also meant that I couldn't talk to my aunt and uncle ever again.
And how old were you when this happened? Sorry.
Oh, sure. So I was 16 when the rumors started, 17 when I had lost my virginity and the rumors continued. And then 18 when I moved out of the house.
Right. Which is still a very, by 18, you're an adult, mm-hmm. but especially given what you've been through, you're in a very vulnerable place. And, people who've been through the kind of trauma that you're describing, often it becomes like a vicious circle of a kind of almost self-fulfilled prophecy, because you've been told your entire life, oh, you're worthless, or you're not good enough, and everything outside of the bubble of God's organization is corrupt and is going to mislead you. Yeah. You end up basically fulfilling those expectations. Yeah. Or that's what I've heard. Other people in your situation, that's what happens to them. So
definitely.
To what extent to what extent was that manifested in your case?
So obviously it was a self-fulfilling prophecy that I could lose everyone and lose everything, and that it would be a rough transition. And I fell flat on my face. I'm not going to lie. When I left and I went out into the world, I fell flat on my face. Of course, I lost every connection I had, every acquaintance that I knew. I lost family connections. I don't have a relationship with my grandparents or my aunt and uncle. Like, there's family that I haven't spoken to in years that won't come anywhere near me. Even without being baptized, I went through a lot of what my sister went through with her being disfellowshipped. I basically mirrored that. And when I moved out and I moved in with someone random, I met her at a burger place. She was a waitress there. And I said, "You're cool. You want to be roommates?" And literally a week later, we moved in together. And she ended up being one of my best friends, which is great. I didn't think it was going to work out that well, but it did. Unfortunately, when I moved in with her, I really just desired connection. I wanted to feel loved. I wanted to feel accepted. I was so incredibly broken that the first thing that I did was I got into drugs. And, normally they say like alcohol is the gateway to other things, right? It's always something smaller that leads you to something more hardcore. I did ecstasy before I ever drank alcohol or smoked weed. I went straight for that because I thought, something called ecstasy, that sounds nice. It's something that sounds so freeing and loving and happy, and all I want to do is be happy. And so I took ecstasy in a room full of strangers that I didn't know, and I didn't care. I just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere. And I overdosed at 18. I should not be here, but I am. I overdosed my third time doing ecstasy. And I was in a hotel room filled with people I'd never met and just living up the party lifestyle, trying to make friends. And I was in and out of consciousness that night. And I don't know how I'm still here. I never received medical care because everyone was on different things and they didn't call for help. But I ended up making my way out of that. And what's so interesting is when I was going through that overdose, I remember my thought being, my parents are going to get a call tomorrow that their daughter died from drugs. And this is what they warned me about. I almost felt like I shamed myself as I was working my way through an overdose, thinking that I disappointed God, that this was everything I had been warned about, that I was something to be ashamed of. And so when I came out of that, I vowed never to do anything ever again. And I've been sober now completely for about 11 years. I never wanted to do much of anything. I drank a little bit on my 21st birthday, and that was the last time I had done anything. But I became homeless. I was homeless a lot throughout my 20s. I had no support system. I had nowhere else that I could really go or belong in. And I slept in my car frequently, or I got into really abusive relationships because I was so vulnerable and I just wanted connection. And I stayed in those abusive relationships for a long time because they also provided a roof over my head. It gave me somewhere I could rest my head. And so I put up with it because it was that, or being in my car and having nowhere else to go. And my mental health still declined greatly once I left. I thought it would make me feel better. And I realized that I had so much trauma to unpack that just leaving wasn't enough. I had to do the work, and I put myself through aggressive therapy and really strive to be a better person and to get my life together. But it's been really hard because even in my 20s, after I left and I was trying to find myself in the world that I was taught not to be a part of, I struggled with feeling urges to come back to the faith as a Jehovah's Witness. I struggled with that a lot. And it was something I was always at war with for years, thinking I'm so far away from it, but maybe that's my safe place, even though it was toxic. Maybe that's better than where I'm at. And I would study the literature on my own, or I even invited Jehovah's Witnesses in my home when they would knock on my door. And I had this whole internal battle that it took me a long time to realize that I was running from myself while simultaneously trying to find myself, and that doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
But I was so desperate for love and connection because everything I knew got torn from me the moment that I walked out that door.
So you it sounds like you had a torrid time throughout your 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, arguably shouldn't be here talking to us now,
Right.
Because of, again, that vicious cycle that I alluded to, whereby you're taught that you're going to self-destruct upon leaving the organization, and therefore you do.
I did.
How did you kind of balance? How did you get back on an even keel?
So it took a very long time. And like I said, I put myself through therapy, and
Good.
I knew that if anyone was going to change or save myself or my life, it was up to me. It wasn't up to the organization. It wasn't up to my mom. It was up to me. It was my responsibility. What happened to me growing up, no, it wasn't fair. And I wish that I wasn't raised as a Jehovah's Witness because it is the source of a lot of my pain. But I can't look in the rearview mirror constantly and be in a state of victimhood, because the reality is that now I'm 32, I'm an adult, I have to pave my own way. And I am not going to lie and say I figured it all out, because I haven't. I still feel like I've regressed in age. I still feel like because I wasn't able to find out who I wanted to be when I was in the faith, I'm stuck sometimes in that mindset of a teenager who's trying to figure out who she is. And that was affirmed to me in therapy 3 years ago. It took several years of therapy and different therapists to land on the miraculous one that I have now. She's amazing. I sought her out in 2020, and in 3 weeks, she had diagnosed me properly when no one else was able to. And I ended up with borderline personality disorder. And I know it's like a highly stigmatized disorder, and a lot of people think negatively of people who have this. But as soon as I received that diagnosis, it all made sense to me. The abandonment issues that I had, the identity conflict, the impulsive drug abuse, the feeling like I don't belong anywhere in this world and always trying to find out where I belong. It all made so much sense. And the self-harm that I would put myself through, or the suicidal ideations I struggled with, it all made so much sense. And having BPD, borderline personality disorder, it also makes you regress in age to a time that was the most traumatic for you. And my most traumatic years were around 16. So I find myself constantly having to do inner child work and address that part of me that I lost in years not being able to connect with. And it's also set me back in terms of education. Obviously, I'm not well educated. I have the education of a sixth grader. I never went to college. I don't even have my high school diploma. I was set out without much to help me to succeed. So I've had to find other ways to succeed. And I also spent so much of my life alone. And I remember during holidays, that was the hardest part, was sitting around without friends, without family, and everyone else was with their loved ones. And I had no one as an adult. I would often order Taco Bell and sit in my room and just wait for the holiday to pass. And I'm really fortunate now because I have a family now. Am I biologically related to them? No, but they're as good as being biologically related, and possibly even better. And they've really helped me heal. They've helped me with my confidence. I have a beautiful partner that I've been with for 7 years who has held space for me while I've healed and addressed my traumas. And I think it's kind of crazy to look at where I came from and where I am, and like the spiral that I went down, and the homelessness and the drug abuse and all of that, to being in a situation where I'm pretty stable and I've got great people around me. And I feel like if I can do that, anyone can do that who leaves the organization. You may fall flat on your face. I'm not going to lie. Like when you are put in such a tight box and then you leave and there's so much in front of you and you don't know what to do with it, it's not always a smooth transition. Oftentimes you're like a giraffe learning how to walk. It's really wonky and complicated. But after a lot of hard work and self-reflection, I've managed to get myself in a pretty decent place. And it's of no thanks to the Jehovah's Witnesses or my family, but it's thanks to the work that I've done.
You did, yeah. You did it all by yourself, and you got there eventually. And wow, what an inspiring story! Because, like I said, it's an organization that can set young people up for failure, with its kind of negativity and doomsday outlook about the world, and its very insular attitudes. It's no surprise that people do fall flat on their face, as you put it. But one way or another, you've muddled through it, and you're here to tell the tale. And your strength, the challenges in your life, you've kind of turned into a positive in a way, because you're now able to, talk to my viewers about them. And I'm sure hundreds, if not thousands, of viewers will draw incredible strength and inspiration from your story. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Of course. And, I do also want to mention that being slut shamed and struggling with your body and believing your body's dirty somehow by natural impulses, it did lead to sexual repression and a sexual disorder like dysfunctioning, and feeling really disconnected from my body, which is something I always have to work on. It's feeling connected with it because I've demonized it over the years and I've shut that down. And I also feel like a lot of people who are brought up in the religion and eventually leave, they may also find that they have CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where you deal with so many things that compile onto you over the years. And if anyone's struggling with their identity, and if anyone's struggling with their mental health, I want you to know that it's not your fault. Don't blame yourself. Don't damn yourself. You're just doing the best that you can. And understand that we were brought up differently as Jehovah's Witnesses. We were brought up with very conditional love. And it's really easy to love yourself conditionally as well as you get older, and to 1 minute love yourself when you do something correct, and the next minute hate yourself because you feel like you did something wrong. And I just want you to hang in there and get the help that you need, and know that you're not the enemy. And regardless of what people may have painted you as, you're not the bad guy. I mean, heck, I say this sometimes to my friends too, that Batman, when he's supposed to save Gotham, the people of Gotham turn against him and they're like, he's the enemy, right? Like he's the cause of all the destruction, when in fact he's the hero. So even heroes, they get villainized, and you have to be the hero of your own story, regardless of what that means for your peers. It's not about them. It's about you and what you need to do to heal. So take charge of your life. Like no one else, as sucky as it is going to save you. You really have to save yourself.
Well, gosh, Porsche, for someone who's not very educated, you've just dropped a massive truth bomb. You've just given an awful lot of wisdom, which I heartily concur with. So once again, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's been a heartbreaking story, but there's so much inspiration to take from it. And I really admire you for coming through it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lloyd. I appreciate it.
Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. Don't forget that you can watch more interviews and more videos by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel, but that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.